Hello everyone, my name is Akal and I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about what a somatic therapist does, or at least what I do, you can check out the link down below this video. There's also a link for donations if you feel so inclined. So what I would like to cover today is the first part of a series of videos I'm going to do on a topic that I'm calling Unpacking the Penis. And specifically today I want to talk about vulnerability. This is a vulnerability that actually is linked to the fact that a man's genitals are external or outside of his body. So much of the content in this video is going to be kind of common sense, but I kind of feel like in our culture today, common sense isn't really all that common. So hopefully you guys will be able to glean some insights from my suggestions in this video, as well as some of the philosophies that I hold as true. So vulnerability as it relates to having external genitals really is connected to a man's reproductive capacity. The testicles, they go up and they go down. They pull up towards the body when the sperm needs to be warmed, and they drop when the sperm needs to be cooled. The fact of the matter is that the sperm, in order for it to be the most effective, needs to be 1 to 2 degrees below the body's core temperature of 98.6 degrees. So that's why they move closer to the body to warm and move further away from the body to cool. But having these external genitals, which is really magical that we can make a baby, etc., with them. But having them outside of our body leaves us open to trauma. It leaves us open to physical attacks. And to me, this is like God's a little joke. Like, men often say, oh, we're so strong and, we've got all this armor and protection and male energy is very aggressive and it's driven and, whatever the generalizations are about masculine energy. One of the things is that you can get a man to cower like a baby and to just to lose his shit completely if you kick him in the balls. I mean, it's unbelievable how incredibly vulnerable men are when you really consider this. So the one thing to kind of keep in mind here is that the times that most men, and I would probably say most men at some point have accidentally or been intentionally hit in that part of their body. There is a trauma that occurs, and this trauma can be healed to some extent, if not entirely. And the way that I healed the trauma that I experienced when I was in middle school, because I got kicked real bad when I was in middle school in the balls, and it was bad. It was really bad. But of course, I was like 12, 13 years old, so it wasn't like I was really hip to the fact that I was then, bringing on a trauma that was going to be on a loop in my nervous system for the next 30 years. I was totally unaware of that fact. However, one of the things I later learned in life is that as I became progressively more sensitive from meditation, yoga, qigong, etc., one of the things I noticed is that I had tension that was being held in that part of my body. The tension was, people go, oh, it's psychological in nature, or it's mental in nature, or it's emotional in nature, or, whatever it is. It's entirely about you. You can categorize it as mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever you want to say. The reality is that everything is interconnected, and there is no separate mental from the emotional and physical from the spiritual. It is all intertwined. So when I was working through this trauma of my being kicked there, one of the things I did was I simply recalled the incident in as vividly as I possibly could. Now, the visual in and of itself, it brought out something interesting. As when I was recalling the feeling, I also noticed that my body viscerally recoiled. There was a tension that built up in my genitalia. And for me, this is significant. It means that there's this feedback loop that's still about 30 years old now. I mean, I don't really need to hold this anymore. So it's kind of a baggage, hence unpacking the penis. So this baggage that I was carrying around, this trauma, one of the ways I worked through it was simply by being aware and objective during this practice of creating the visualization or recalling the memory of the incident. And then also connecting, and this is probably the most important part, is to connect where in the body did I feel or do you feel this pain, this trauma? Where do you feel the tension? And again, most likely you're going to feel the grip or the tension somewhere around the genitalia, So having those external genitals and all those sort of various traumas that we can accumulate around them also leads me to a trauma in which we really didn't have a choice in. Of course, not all men have gone through this, but many of us have, which is circumcision. Circumcision, to me, is an archaic and barbaric practice. It couldn't go away faster, in my opinion. It needs to. It doesn't make sense in contemporary times. The Mayo Clinic, I went to their online website, and they explained circumcision makes it easier for a boy to wash his penis. Really? So that's going to justify taking a knife to a baby's genitals? It's ridiculous. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of other reasons for circumcision. I think some of them are very occulted. I think there's some very hidden reasons for circumcision, which I'm going to get to in a moment. But the one thing about circumcision is that you're removing foreskin. Now, within this foreskin is a lot of nerve endings. And again, the medical literature says, it's generally a harmless procedure that, the impact of which is not noticeable and blah, 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 blah. Again, I'm not buying it. You're removing nerves that are connected to, again, the rest of the man, his central nervous system, hence his endocrine system. Hence, there's a change or a deviation from the norm when it comes to someone's hormones. Men who have circumcision have been shown to be more promiscuous, to be less likely to wear condoms, to be more kinky, etc., etc. Which to me sort of spells out a story of a man being a little more out of control of his sexual energy if he's had that foreskin removed. Which brings up my next area of vulnerability, which has to do with how a man is jerked around sexually. So a man's sexual energy is jerked around a great deal in our culture by imagery. Sexual imagery in the form of like lingerie ads and bikini things, or just like all the clickbaity stuff that you find on websites. There's a lot of allure out there. And not only that, just the proliferation of porno. I mean, porno is everywhere in pretty much anything you want to look at. I mean, there's some disturbing shit, but the reality is there's a lot of pornography. And it's endless. And so there's constant encouragement given to men to discharge their semen, to get rid of it. Now, as men get jerked around, one of the things that ends up happening is that this pressure builds up. We lose our center when we get jerked around. So again, we are vulnerable to losing our center. And as our sexual energy gets jerked around, because many of us have not had the training or the conditioning to realize that we have a choice to discharge or not, we often become very, very uncomfortable with the pressure of horny. So horny is high. It is an ecstatic state. So when you have a full charge of sexual energy, there is a pathway there. It's a pathway back into the body, back into the physical form, back into density, back into something more solid, back into ground. The yogis, tantrics, Taoists, etc. have all said that if a man discharges his sexual energy, he loses his root. And this discharge also makes us vulnerable. And I'll explain. So I mentioned earlier that pleasure, sensation, and horny are all pathways back into the physical body, into something more dense, into our ground, or our root. By root, they mean your foundation or your base. that which connects you to the material plane, to density. So when a man loses his root, he loses that pathway. He becomes less interested in his body. He becomes less self-sensual, and hence feels less. And if he's feeling less of his body, unfortunately, he's feeling less of life. And that's the problem. The less we feel in life, the more we pleasure seek. We seek through drugs, alcohol, more sex, whatever it may be. So again, one of the most important things here to realize is that you do indeed have a choice. And this is a bit of an experiment for any man, is to discharge or to not discharge. But it's really important that every man realizes that there is indeed a choice. So now all this vulnerability, all this discharging, it also reduces a lot of different other aspects of a man's vitality. A person's immune system is affected by the loss of sexual energy. Overall male wellness is just diminished by the loss of sexual energy. So if this is done too frequently, it can have some very long-term, negative side effects. Personally, myself, I experienced a great deal of, cloudy mental functioning. I also felt very numb, a lot more depression, etc., etc. So when I started to take control of that aspect of my life, I noticed more physical strength. I noticed, again, more mental clarity. And the best part for me, because I am very spiritually inclined, was I was having more woo-woo. I was seeing more. I had more visions and auditory hallucinations and all sorts of interesting things that kind of keep me on my path. So in the end, when considering overall male vulnerability as it relates to his genitalia, so the one thing to kind of keep in mind is whether we're looking at circumcision or we're looking at the encouragement to discharge sexual energy, there's one thing that's very clear here, which is that there seems to be, and this is a little conspiratorial, but there seems to be on some level, if I'm a group of people or a person who wants to control humanity on some level, specifically men, one of the things you do is you create disorder around sexual functioning. Because that disorder around sexual functioning, again, sexual energy is connected to the entire being, it will also dull the mind. And the word government simply means to govern minds. You do the math. And with that, I will say thank you much, and I appreciate you guys watching this video.